Welcome to Marathon Champions, the podcast where running legends Benji Durden, Bill Rodgers, and Ron Tabb share their timeless wisdom on marathon training and inspire listeners with their wealth of experience. These champions continue to impact the running world today.
So, Bill, we want to make this one because it's we're celebrating Boston, and you are Boston. When I think of the Boston Marathon, I think of Bill Rodgers. I don't know, who can make, maybe Greta can at New York, with all of her wins there. But what you did at Boston in the '70s, it's unprecedented and it's amazing.
In a nutshell, well, just to start, I lived in Boston. I'm from Newington, Connecticut, outside of Hartford. I lived in Hartford till I was 7, 8 years old with our family.
What year was your first Boston? I don't think it was your first one was your win.
My first Boston, Benji, was 73. It was my first marathon.
Yep.
And I had gotten back into running. I quit running for about a year and a half, because when I graduated from college, I actually missed out. I didn't have a final season. There was a national student strike by 700 colleges about our country dealing with the Vietnam War and the struggle. And I was very much against the political people that pushed us into the war. And so I applied for conscientious objector status, and I was given that status. So I had to do a low-paying job, like you were private in the Army or something. So I got a job in a hospital in Boston as what they call a messenger. You carried blood samples around and took patients around. It was very educational. But also I saw the Boston Marathon, of course, and because I lived about a half mile from the finish, Benji, and so I saw Jeff Galloway running, and John Vitale, my old teammate from Westland, Jeff Galloway and Henry Burfoot, another Westland guy, and John Vitale, University of Connecticut, some runners I had run with before. And I did that my second year watching it. I had started running, but I ran a 30K race. I came in third in the 30K. I ran that race in my blue jeans. It was February. Nike hadn't started their running gear style yet, and no one else had, no Lululemon and all that stuff, so, and that, Benji and Ron, because you were there, so we all lived through that, running in shoes that weren't so good and clothing that was a little questionable, but I was having fun again, and life was good. And what happened was I tried to start a union at the hospital. They didn't like that at the hospital, so they fired me. So suddenly I was free to run. And I said, I just saw, I'm going to go back to running. I joined the Boston YMCA, start running on the track, that sort of thing, when you take a break, and I think most people do quit running. But when you have this marathon right in your backyard and seeing some of your old teammates, because this is a team sport, as you know, and then I joined Jack Semple from the Boston Athletic Association, asked me to join the BAA, and I said sure, and of course, and I knew what the BAA was a bit, but the problem was most of us didn't own cars. And so I, in the end, ended up joining a new club called the Greater Boston Track Club, coached by Billy Squires, who was a Notre Dame graduate, one of our country's top milers, way back, in the 50s, when Bannister was trying to be the first man to break the 4-minute mile. So I ran Boston. I remember warming up before the race, a day or two before, and Amy Burfoot was telling me, be careful, Benji, because the temperatures were creeping up. And I think Boston is the trickiest marathon to do well in, as even the great Eliud Kipchoge discovered last year. And we have all struggled at Boston. If you haven't struggled, you haven't run it enough. But we also have run our PRs there because we've run it a lot. But my first one, I didn't know what I was doing. The gun went off. As you know, we start in Hopkinton on top of the big hill. And I took off down the hill and started chasing Neil Cusack, who is returning to Boston this year on the anniversary of his 50th. I didn't see him. He took off. I didn't know what I was doing. There was no water on the course. I ran the first 10 miles like I was running 10 miles, and then I was tired. And so I kind of kept going until I made it to the top of Heartbreak Hill. And then I lived in Jamaica Plain at the time, about 3 miles away, and I just jogged home. And so that was my introduction to the Boston Marathon. It was a mean race for me, but I learned a lot, Benji.
So why don't you ask one, Ron?
So, what then would you say, with that experience, the first one, what would you say you discovered is the most difficult, most challenging part of that course? Would you say it's the first 10 miles? Would you say it's Heartbreak Hill, or would you say it's the descent?
I love the descent. I used to be a good downhill runner. I was a 4-foot striker, and I later trained more for Boston. It took me really a couple of years to learn the course, but joining Greater Boston Track Club, we met at Boston College at the 21-mile mark, and the track was there. And the Greater Boston Track Club was started by Jack McDonald, who was a Boston College miler, and Bob Seveny, Vietnam veteran. And these two guys started the Greater Boston Track Club, and then they brought on Coach Billy Squires, who was running about a 408 mile when Bannister was going for the sub 4. What I think is that everyone, if you mess with the first miles and you go too hard, we've all, I did that 2 or 3 times, 4 times, something at Boston, because we're all racers. We were racers, but a lot of beginner runners do the same thing. It's the Boston trap, and you really got to bide your time. Then once I started to train in the course more, I learned that. My second marathon, I went to a little tiny flat course, cool weather marathon, because I got so beat up in the heat, and I was paced by Tom Dudarian, a teammate in Greater Boston Track Club, for 16 miles. And when I hit 16 miles, I knew I could finish then, it was a cool day. And I actually went on and actually won that race. And I'm in 2:28. And so then I felt I was a marathoner. And so it's like you've got to, if you can run with someone else, it's easier that way. So much easier. If you get out there on your own, it was a tough experience for me, I had other marathons down the road because, as you guys know, we were in the boom days of marathoning, started by Frank Shorter with his great victory in the Munich Olympic Marathon, first American man to win the Olympic gold, since Johnny Hayes, 1908 in London. So we were all kind of following his footsteps in our own way. We all have our unique stories, and every runner does. And but Boston, you develop kind of a love-hate thing, but in the end, I love the course. But I believe the weather is the great challenge really at Boston. I think it's the hardest of the so-called majors because of the weather and the tricky downhill, and Ron and Benji, you ran your PRs there too, just like I did. When we got good, cool weather, you could really race there, but it can really knock you around, the Boston Marathon. There's no question, I dropped out 3 times there.
So you won 4 times. Is there one that is more special than the others?
I think, when I won in 75, Benji, my first win, I was kind of in a state of shock, because I didn't expect to win. We never expect to win a race. This is such a competitive sport. But I had won the Philadelphia Marathon, Benji, the previous November.
Mhm.
But it was a really hard day in Philadelphia. It was around Thanksgiving time, like around 32 degrees and rain, super cold and wind. And I ran 2:21. But I had been training high mileage, and we all have our breakthrough day. and every runner has that. It's there for everybody, but you have to give your body time to recover. And I had finally recovered. The previous month, I had run in the World Cross Country Championships in Rabat, Morocco, and had won a bronze medal for the U.S. And when I took that bronze medal, I was a teammate of Frank Shorter's and Jeff Galloway. And I talked to Jeff Galloway and I said, I think I knew he was with Nike. I said, can you get me some shoes? I'm doing Boston next month. Steve Prefontaine sent me the shoes, Benji, that I won Boston in. And I knew who Prefontaine was, but I got, when I was running the race that day, around 8 miles, I was duking it out with the leaders, Mario Cuevas from Mexico, Tom Fleming from New Jersey, my very good friend, and Jerome Drayton from Canada, and Drayton was pushing it, and someone yelled, "Go Canada!" But I was feeling very feisty. It was a tailwind day, Benji. It's a day you can go for it. And after I won that bronze medal, I got all kicked at the end of the race, but I really went for it. And I said, I'm gonna go for it now. And it was my third Boston, Benji. So I think for the new marathoners, take your time. I believe you have to give yourself up to 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 marathons to get your best times. Do you think so, Benji and Ron? Something like that, if you can run a certain course. I mean, Benji, you hammered away Houston, so did you, Ron, and you did Boston as well. So these are the races where we really got our nose into races and we had experienced our training and we were strong enough now to have success. Then everyone finds that, but you have to give yourself time. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, my experience at Boston, similar to yours. I didn't realize that you had dropped a couple of times. My first one was 78, right after college, and I had won um, Houston, later New Orleans, a few weeks later St. Louis, going into Boston, and I'm feeling pretty confident about my running at that. This is 1978. I get out to Boston, and I take there's actually a picture with Tom Fleming and I taking the lead really early. That first miles is wicked, and it just seems easy. I'm going, oh, this is going to be a piece of cake. And, you know, I had gone out way, way, way too hard. And ultimately, I had to drop out just because I'd gone out way too hard. And so then the next year, 79, I was with 3 miles to go. I was still in contact with the top 10, and I took no liquids, thinking that I would be able to run 26 without taking liquids. I always needed grabbing the bottle or the cups and trying to drink, and ended up running the last 3 miles in 8-minute pace. So I went from being in 212, 213 to 219. And that was just in a matter of 3 miles. So the next year, 80, I figured it out and finished third there. So I learned from, as you're saying, the mistakes make early in during that course. Your first Boston Marathon was what year, Benji?
My first, I ran in 77. And I was kind of full of myself. I had won Carolina Marathon earlier that year. I was a 219 marathoner, thought I was special. Coach Squires also made me feel like I was somebody special, and took me out and we drove the course, and God, that was an awful course. When you drive it, I mean, it takes you forever because everybody's driving the course, and it's really depressing to be out there like for 3 hours looking at the course. And it was 77 was also a warm day, and I ended up basically struggling to the finish. I didn't run really terrible, but I felt pretty bad about it. It wasn't wasn't what I was expecting to run. Because, like I say, I was a, um, 219 marathoner. I ended up running 224. And that was kind of what ended up making me into a heat trainer to prepare for heat. I didn't want to have that happen again. And then the next year I came back, and when you went out really hard in 78, I went out really cautiously. And I was starting to struggle about mid-race, and one of my longest friends, Lee Fiddler, came by me, and I thought, I can't let Lee beat me. And he spurred me on. I ended up running 215 for a pretty solid PR. I think it was right at a 4-minute PR. Actually, it was 2:15:03, and my PR was 2:19:03, so it was a 4-minute PR, and I got 11th. And that was sort of what made me a national caliber marathoner. Even though I'd gotten second in the nationals earlier, it was a slow time and it wasn't everybody there. But that performance was sort of my stepping stone into being a national caliber. But while we're talking about this, one of the things people keep asking over the years, and asked me several times, about what the diet. I mean, we at this point, we didn't know about carbo loading really yet. I mean, it sort of came along as we were beginning. Billy, what did you have any special dietary plans week before a race and the day before and the morning before?
My first marathon, early days, people said eat pancakes, but I was too nervous to eat pancakes. I'm a toast eater, so I eat a lot of toast. The night before I would eat pasta. I love macaroni and cheese. I ate that in high school, so I would eat a lot of macaroni and cheese the night before, New York City or Boston, whatever. I think I never did the real carbo loading diet where you depleted your glycogen reserves. I never did that, but I ate a pretty decent diet. I did eat too much junk food in my life. I think you did too, Benji. We all
Yeah,
did.
yeah, I think we all did.
Yeah.
Because we were going for it. We were going for it. We're high mileage runners. We're hungry a lot, and nobody knew about as much as the younger runners of today have more knowledge through the various sites and the magazines, Runner's World, Running Times, Let's Run, and so on, or podcasts like today. So people can be much more informed, but I do think you kind of have to find out what works for you a little bit and what might get you. Everyone's got a little bit different stomach, and I was very lucky. I didn't ever have real bad stomach issues, but I have some friends who can barely go for a run, and they're starting to look for the woods,
Yeah.
So a lot of these things are individual, but I think what what we have said, Ron and Benji, and I don't know if Amy's done Boston too, but anyone who's done Boston, including, maybe if Iliad's the greatest marathoner of all time, or Frank Shoulders, who's done it as well, knows, it's just tricky. It's a really tricky race that will beat you up unless you back off.
Yeah, it beat me up to the point where that was sort of my swan song. I didn't really ever run a fast marathon after that.
After
1983, when I ran my PR, I tore my plantar fascia, and I never really got back. My second, next fastest marathon was a 2:15, and then that was the last time I broke 2:18.
83, could it have been your shoes?
Yeah, there was a problem with the shoe. I had a wrinkle in the sock liner that I didn't realize. I'd run over 50 miles in the shoes, but because I'd been running on flat courses, I didn't notice it.
Yeah. See,
but still, Boston beats you up. Most of my memories of Boston are backing down the stairs the day after.
Yeah, that's right. It's the meanest marathon out there, and we all love it, but it's also the trickiest. And in regards to shoes, let's face it, we were guinea pigs for the shoe industry to a degree, though they're all working hard, to try to improve shoes. And we runners all had our little mini deals. The shoe companies were a little stingy, I would say, way back in the day. They treat the athletes better today, and that's good.
They treat the very top better. If you're not at the very top, it's hard to get sponsorship. Back in our day, there was some sponsorship for even semi-good, just sub-elite runners could get some sponsorship. Now, if you're not, in the top 5 to 10, you don't get sponsorship for Americans. I mean, and
Well, I think you could you might, if you were a pretty high level runner. I wasn't high enough level runner high school to get a scholarship to college.
I didn't either.
You didn't either. And what about you, Ron? I think you were in the same deal.
I got $100.
Yeah,
I
And
did
that,
walk on and earn
yeah.
a scholarship, but I was not recruited. Nobody recruited me for college. I walked on and made the cross country team that fall and got a partial scholarship. I never had more than a partial during my
Yeah.
collegiate career.
I think the message is that we are trying to say to the runners is we are pretty much everyday runners to a degree. We found who is the person or persons that lifted you up. For me, it was Coach Billy Squires, my teammates at Greater Boston Track Club, at every different level. And you must have had a coach, someone who believes in you, or a significant other. My brother Charlie helped me a lot. So who were the people for you two guys too?
Well, for me, I first person that really gave me any insight to how to train was a teammate named Bill Elwine. He was a Lydiard believer, and
Yeah.
he helped me understand after I'd quit my collegiate career. He helped me understand a little bit better about how to train. During college, I was doing high intensity intervals almost every day and fairly low mileage. If I had a 50-mile week, it was a big week, really, really
Yeah.
big week. And
Yeah.
so I never really prospered at 100 plus miles, but getting up to 80 to 90 was where I started showing success. But Bill got me started, and then over the years, I would talk to other people. Dick Berkeley and I trained together for a bit, and he taught me some things. And Mike Caldwell, another one of my oldest friends, coached me off and on. And during 82 and 83, he started helping me, and that's part of what got me to 209.
Who was this?
Mike Caldwell.
Oh, Mike Caldwell.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he ran with the Florida Track Club when he was getting his master's degree in physiology. So he had exposure to people. We picked up from others Billy, you had Coach Squires, which was he was a remarkable coach and influenced a lot of good runners. Greg Meyer, for instance, was
Dick Beardsley.
Dick Beardsley. I mean, um,
Greg.
and Haji, and there's a lot of people that his
Absolutely.
finger touched the sport deeply. I even learned a little bit from Coach Squires.
Yeah,
I keep looking for my little swept book, which I can't find. I know I had it, but I can't find it anymore. But
in the 60s and beforehand, it was all track and do speed work. But I think LSD, long slow distance, came into vogue, and people like Amby Burfoot incorporated that training. Also, there was the training from the athletes of yesteryear, people like Johnny Kelly, the younger, but all over the country. I think we also look to the people getting the media coverage. Jim Ryan, the great miler.
that's what got me started as a miler, because of Jim Ryan.
God. It's just incredible the great talent that our country has. And I always say, who are the real record holders? They're people walking down the street, but they were never chosen to be on a team. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Ron and Benji and Amy, they were never, someone has to believe in you. And I had a good high school coach, a good college coach, and then Bill Squires. And I had people around me. So I was lucky. I was very lucky. Didn't mean I didn't get beat up some. Amy Burfoot, Jeff Galloway, my family members, people I was closely involved with in my life. And so we had those relationships.
So that brings me to another question. What was your mindset when you were preparing for Boston? The weeks before. So your first Boston that you won in '75. What was your mindset like then, and then how going forward for the next 3 marathons, Boston's that you won, how did you, after becoming a champion, how did you avoid all the distractions
Yeah.
that comes along with being a champion?
You know, Ron and Benji, we all wiped out a lot. That's just the true story. I over raced. I had to do a lot of promotional work as I started to succeed and get a little shoe deal. And then years later in 78, followed Frank Shorter, who started a runner's clothing line. The sport was opening up that we could make a living. We actually could be paid to be athletes. What a brilliant idea. USA Track and Field didn't believe in that at the time, but we forced their hand, you know, and finally in 1981 it came true, and we could be professional athletes. And anyone can try, the door is wide open. But you know, after I won Boston, I immediately went to another race, you know, another marathon the next month in May. I went over to Enschede in Holland, and I thought I was going to win. And, you know, I just ran the fastest time in the world, 2:09:55, you know, cold at tailwind day and everything. But I went there, and there was another Boston Marathon winner, Neil Cusack, who won it in 74. And there was another Boston winner, Ron Hill. Well, I thought Ron Hill was too old, you know, so I'm going to beat him. I beat him at Boston in 75. You know, I can beat him. He's the old man. Well, the old man won the race. The old guy won the race. And Neil Cusack and I were on the side of the road at the 30K complaining about the heat. And Ron Hill, who is one of the most phenomenal distance athletes of all time, the amount that he raced, he was truly a man of steel, you know, and his books are wonderful, you know. But so that was a learning experience for me. I think a lot of our problems, you know, within the sport were the leadership, not the coaches. The coaches were great, but at the leadership level within the federation and some of the races, you know, putting on even New York City Marathon, you know, 4 laps of Central Park in 90-degree weather, and Boston running at 12 noon, and us runners trying to change things, but we had no real power. But the media did start to listen to us a bit, I do believe. There were good
Well,
writers.
how did you balance that? I mean, because you know, by the time you were
Family
running your
members helped me.
by 1980 when you won your 4th one, I mean,
Yes.
there's a ton. You are now you're known as Boston Billy,
Mhm.
have your own running line. You are sponsored by ASICS,
Yeah.
and numerous other sponsors
On a
going
Tiger
on.
on Suka, not Asics. It wasn't Asics yet.
On it, okay, but so, but so now how do you handle all of this? I mean, wife, you know, relationships, media attention,
Well,
sponsors. How do you balance all of that? Because everyone
couldn't
wants a
do
little
it.
bit. Everyone wants a little bit of you.
I ended up getting divorced twice, you know, and our clothing line got taken uh and went into bankruptcy. The Bank of Boston came and took my house, you know, which I had sunk a lot of money into. I had a lot of failures in racing too, you know, and I overdid it a lot, but that's my personality too. And I think it's we marathoners, we are, I can do it, people. And it's a very American thing too, I think, you know, a can-do attitude. We have that in spades. That's from the World War II generation. But both of my parents, like your parents, were World War II vets, you know, and so we were imbued with that. It's an American thing, but it's also a learning curve. And so I think today, I think the athletes have more stability. It's still a hard sport for everyone. It doesn't matter how much money you're paid. You can be paid too much. Um, I think sometimes, but we certainly weren't. And but we had a lot of fun. I think that's something that Greg Meyer does talk about a lot. We had fun and we could savor our victories to some degree, at least. We were lucky. Look at the wins we had. We had some good wins. No one
Oh,
can
yeah.
take them from us. We didn't
It's
cheat. We
it's
didn't
interesting
cheat.
that you talk about the your divorce, because at the '83 Boston, Benji and and Greg and I, we were all three
Yeah,
going through divorces
yeah.
at the same time.
I was a separation, but it became a divorce. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, but it's ironic that the top three guys there that year, and I think even Ed Mendoza was going through some relationship issues during that time as well.
Who
yeah.
was?
Ed Mendoza
Ed
did.
Mendoza,
Oh,
who
Ed
was fourth.
Mendoza.
Uh,
Super guy, super athlete, my
yeah,
roommate.
Very underappreciated, very under celebrated.
Totally,
yeah.
totally. And that's the way the sport sometimes is. And, it's really hard to find your way, I think. And I think we ended up finding people who helped us a tremendous amount because we did succeed. We were lucky. We took our bumps along the way, and a lot of people don't understand that part of the sport. I don't think, but I think when people look at athletes who are visible, we were semi-visible. Benji and Ron, in our sport, trying to become an Olympian or win the Houston Marathon. These are tough races to win. And I don't think people understand how hard it is to try to do that. It took
I don't
us
think we
years.
appreciated how hard it was to do it when we were doing it. I think we do it and we think, well, of course I did it. I'm that good. In hindsight, it's a lot more obvious how much went into winning a race.
I didn't feel like, for me, I didn't feel like it was uh, hard work. I never expected to be competing. I remember the 1980, 1978 Boston Marathon towing the line, and I'm looking around at all the world-class athletes. There was you, there was Frank Shorter, there was Tom Fleming, Haji. I mean, I'm looking around. Benji, I didn't know you at that time, but you know,
Nobody did.
well, no one knew who I was either. But
I
uh,
did.
that's amazing that how you knew so many of the runners.
You
I
know what,
remember.
Ron? The reason is we were road warriors. You
Yeah,
know the movie Road Warriors, the Australian
Yep,
movie?
yep,
Well,
yep.
that's who we were.
Yeah,
yeah,
Benji, I remember running the Big Boy 20K or the LB's 20K Distance Classic,
yep.
Wheeling, West Virginia. If
Yep.
you want to test yourself as a road warrior, I don't care who you are, go to Wheeling and test your wheels there because this is really a hard race. And I remember, I think duking it out with Benji there, I think around the 8 or 9 mile mark, and it is tough.
Well,
Lots,
that was I believe that was 1979. I could check here, but up to that point, the first person who crested the hill at about, I want to say, was it about 2.5, 3 miles, something like that?
yeah, the
First
first
big
big
hill.
hills.
And that was 79. And I had run Amsterdam the weekend before, the Sunday before.
Okay.
And taken off Monday and Tuesday and just doing some touring there in Holland and came into Wheeling on Wednesday. So I was there from Wednesday to Saturday for the race. And so we're running along and it's kind of spitting rain and nobody's really going for it. And I thought, well, whoever crests the hill first is always one in the pass. So I took off. And I also was a pretty good downhill runner.
Yeah, yeah.
After the top of that hill, there's a lot of downhill, a couple small hills and a lot of downhill.
Oh,
Then
yeah,
Then there
absolutely.
was Chicken Neck, I think is what they called it, the last big hill. Not just before that, you caught me and you broke me down on that last hill.
Well, I knew the course.
Yeah, well,
Really?
I knew the course too. I'd run it before, but I also just I couldn't hang on to you. The marathon caught up to me. But that was the
Well,
first time you and I really
that's,
went at it against each other.
well, that's what I was trying to say. It was how we overdid it. Today, the professional marathoners do 2 marathons a year. We were doing 3 or 4, and the most I did in a year was 5.
I did 5 as well.
That's what I'm saying, because we were the first, not real marathoners. There were the working class marathoners of, history in the United States and the world, the Johnny Kellys and the people who came before him as well. Elder John Kelly and the DeMars, Clarence DeMars and so forth. But They were truly working class, and we were kind of the step between that and today's professionalism, when no one has a real job. But we
Yeah,
sometimes have real jobs part of the time,
yeah,
you
but
know?
the way we made our living was by running races, and we'd run some marathons that weren't quite as focused as others, but that was how we got paid, showing up to run races.
What race, which because Boston I ran in 1980 when I finished third there, that did more to enhance my career than any other race that I ever ran. Second American behind you that year. And then all of a sudden I was getting invitations to run all over the world.
Yeah.
What race would you identify? Was it your 75 Boston that gave enhanced your career? Was it your second win? Was it the New York? Was it your first win at New York? Which one would you say had more to do with enhancing your career and opening up doors?
I think once you race well at Boston, people know you've got the bona fides to be out there duking it out anywhere, and so that happened for all three of us. And we you know took a while to get there. I think it was my
Mhm.
fifth marathon, but I lived there in Boston. It was easier for me. I could train in Boston all the time, and we all did. Greg Meyer came to Boston. We were at World Cross together in '78, and I said, Greg, he's just graduating from the University of Michigan. He beat me in World Cross. I was the last guy to make the team, in fact. In fact, made the team down in Atlanta on a 27-degree day in January. It can get cold in Atlanta. But I knew Greg could be good in the marathon. And we once you got that team, and I always looked at my competition. I tried to study my competition. I knew who Benji was. I knew who you were, Ron, very well too, as we started to race each other. Then I looked at your teammates and what you were doing. I tried to figure it out. But I think I was living in Boston. Anyone who lives there, and it's very popular among people in Massachusetts, New England, of course, but around the country too. But do you know what I'm saying? It's like Johnny Kelly. Look at Johnny Kelly, the elder. He ran Boston 60 times. It's like ridiculous.
Jesus.
So it's like a disease. It's Bostonitis. And I have a friend now who's 65 years old, and he's doing his 40th Boston this year. Former wrestler from BC, So everything is that we had that team, and that psychological power, that we had a pretty good team. We could go down to the Virginia 10 miler and duel with Frank Shorter's racing team. It had Herb Lindsay and Stan, uh,
Vernon,
yes, and
Oh, Stan Mavis.
John
Stan
Sinclair.
Davis. Yep, and a lot of so the team thing was starting to gel in America. You had that in Atlanta. You had Galloway cranking up his teams down there. You had the Atlanta Track Club and everything. The Peachtree was cranking out. So I think the running boom was on. It was really on, and we all rode the wave. As sometimes we sunk under the waves. We had to do what we had to do, is what I'm saying, I think.